I guess if my students ever get tired of the poor quality of my webcam, they'll pitch in and buy me a new one. But until then, you're just going to have to put up with my words not matching what my mouth is forming and a little bit of fuzzy. I want to talk about the Greeks. And when people say mythology, that's usually the first culture that jumps into anybody's mind is that of the Greeks and then of the Romans. And of course, the Romans just kind of wholesale adopted and adapted the Greek mythology, which is one reason why I don't go into it. The Babylonians did pretty much the same thing to the Sumerian pantheon in that they changed the names, changed some of the details here and there, especially have to do with in having to do with Inanna and Ishtar. They really didn't change a whole lot. The Romans might have changed even less. The Romans did have some original gods, including Janus, the two-faced god who looked both into the future and into the past, which of course is the reason why we have the month January, because it's looking over the immediate year that just passed and the year that's coming up. The Romans were also influenced by the Etruscans, and unfortunately we don't know a lot about the Etruscans because we haven't been able to crack their script and not been able to read the records that they left behind. It could be, however, that the Romans even learned about Greek mythology in part through the Etruscans. But at any rate, we're not going to discuss the Romans in any great depth, and we're going to concentrate on the Greeks. And again, as I began, the Greeks is what usually pops into a person's mind, and then maybe Egypt, and then maybe Norse, and whichever order that would go in. Now, the Greeks were revisionist. They revised earlier myths from especially Egypt. They had very close associations with Egypt. And as a matter of fact, after the death of Alexander, and when the Ptolemies set up their reign in Egypt, basically Egypt became Hellenized. And of course, as I said when we studied the Egyptian mythology section, that we know the Greek gods, or excuse me, the Egyptian gods by their Greek names. And we also know Kemet by its Greek name, Egypt. So Greek myth is revisionist, and a lot of people don't realize that because they're not aware of the mythoi that preceded the Greeks. We see it particularly, many places, but particularly in the myth of Demeter, because if you cast your mind back to Egypt, which was quite some time ago, both in this class and time-wise, you will remember the myth of Isis and how Osiris was, went into the casket and, was set afloat in the Nile by Set and came ashore at Byblos, and how Isis went in search for him, and when she got to the palace at Byblos, she took the small son of the king and the queen and was fond of him and was passing him through the flame in order to give him eternal life and to make him immortal, or at least to live as long as the gods, because the Egyptian gods weren't immortal. And Queen Astarte comes in, freaks out. Isis drops the baby, and the chance is ruined. This is later repeated in Greek myth when Demeter goes in search of Persephone. She wanders and she wanders, and finally she comes to Eleusis, where she goes into the palace of the king and queen, disguised as an older woman, and becomes the nursemaid for the child Demophon, who is, of course, the heir of the king and queen. And Demeter does the same thing. She passes Demophon through the flames in order to give him immortal life because she is fond of him. And remember, the Greek gods, at least the Olympians, are immortal. The queen comes in, again, to use the vernacular, freaks out, and in some versions Demeter drops the child and actually kills it, and in other versions she merely says, oh, you ruined it, and now your child is not going to have immortality. We see myths repeated, of course, in many other ways, and of course the big one is the dying and resurrected deity that began in Egypt, the first recorded one, along with Inanna, who's one of the first recorded ones. Those deities continue on in Greek, and we have quite a few of them. Dionysus, also known as Zagreus in Crete, Adonis, just Persephone, and there are even more than that. So Greek myth is revisionist myth. There's not a lot new there, and even less new in Roman myth. And it all started before that era that we usually think of when we think of Greece, which is the Hellenes, or the classical period of Greece. It really started before Greece was even Greece, and it really started in Crete.